All right, it is my pleasure to be joined by Lance Rosenberg. Lance, I don't know you do a lot of big things in the hockey world, the business world, but I'll let you tell us what you do because you probably are better than me. So, Lance, first of all, thanks for joining, and second, what exactly do you do in the hockey world and in general?
My pleasure joining you. Number one, my background, I worked in the Flyers organization for 10 plus years. I got the experience, a lot of highs with that organization, including being an emergency goalie with the team for those, that duration, and having a lot of lifelong stories. I ended up taking a job working in the KHL in 2013. And after that, I needed to get away from hockey altogether. So I moved to Houston in 2015. And when I came here, I wasn't really involved with the game. And when I left in 2019, I took an opportunity to go back working around hockey again up in St. Louis. And, it just brought back the passion. I don't know why I hit it for 5 plus years when I first lived here, but I met my wife when she lived in Houston and an opportunity for us to move back. And, when I moved back, a bunch of my old friends said, "Why don't you get involved, start playing again?" I had no interest. And I got a phone call from Hockey Players in Business, and I serve as the president of the Houston chapter. And we found a way to do community events to help promote and grow the sport of hockey in Houston. And obviously, as you know, we don't have professional hockey anywhere nearby. 3.5 hours is the closest location for hockey. So we ended up putting on a bunch of community events, whether it's watch parties. Our marquee event is called Hockey Day in Houston, where over 5,000 plus hockey fans came by as I would call it, no different than a block party that you would see in an NHL market, help market and promote the sport, getting new players that way. It's just created a lot of momentum for us, in Houston. So I'm a volunteer. I love just being able to help the ranks, the organizations, and work together and create a vision like how we can help grow the sport with outdated ranks and without professional hockey representation.
Yeah, I knew like letting you describe what you're doing because not only do you have a good hands-on experience with Houston, and you have a lot of understanding of the market that the NHL might look into when it comes to expansion, because that's what we're talking about really, expansion, relocation, what markets you've been around, so you know a lot of what makes a hockey market work, what would be a pitfall or a downfall for any elite market that looks into, and Houston obviously is one of them, and you've been very involved in Houston in general, trying to get grow the game there. But what? So I'll start with a general question on the NHL, which is, what do you think as the NHL? What do you think the NHL would look for? What are some key qualities when they look into a city that they're looking for when it comes to NHL expansion or relocation? But for the intents and purposes, I think expansion is the big focus now because they've figured out the mess that was Arizona, and now it's Utah. And expansion feels inevitable in all sports, and it's been something that's picked up steam in recent years. So, what do you think are some of the key qualities in a city that the NHL is looking at?
Okay, time to put on my Gary Bettman hat. So number one, I think, you got to look at the surrounding corporate support. I mean, everybody knows that you need the corporate support with either the sponsorship or marketing in the community and getting out there. So you look at the foundation of Houston, the three main industries here that are never going to go away: oil and gas, technology, and healthcare. I mean, you look at MD Anderson, you look at ExxonMobil, you look at, all these other companies that are just have strongholds in the Houston market. That is the reason why it is so transient as they recruit and continue to grow, bringing Northerners down here. When you look at the Houston Astros and you look on the outfield wall, it's obvious. When you look at the Houston Dynamo soccer, it's obvious. The Texans and the Rockets. Every organization's a little bit different, but you see very little overlap of the sponsors that, in this professional market. Um, you look at how transient this city is. There's a Canadian Club of Houston, and what's been shared with me in the past through some networking events is that there's over 25,000. That numbers I heard is as high as 30 plus thousand Canadians that have moved here to work in these industries or to escape the winter up north. But you look at the passionate hockey players. Then that's not including people who've moved here from the north, like myself and many others who are involved with the game. So there's a stat that floats around: one in every three Houstonians is actually not from Houston. Find me a city that's like that in this country, and I would be shocked. So the last piece, it's sports crazy. I mean, everybody hears about Texas football and, baseball, basketball, but, I look at my town and the school district is very involved with growing athletics as part of, the curriculum. And what you see is that parents are always enrolling kids in sports organizations. Jack Stanfield, whose jersey sits behind me, he's a pioneer in sports broadcast and played for the Arrows coach. You name it, he's been involved in a lot of the different times the NHL almost came here. He shared with me a statistic that back in the 70s, hockey, the WHA Arrows were the second most popular team in Houston when it wasn't nearly as transient. So that tells you the growth potential that the city has for professional hockey to return.
Yeah, I think the big thing you're mentioning is, well, for start, you're mentioning the two big ones, which are people and money. You need to have the people there, the population, and you need to have the money somewhere, whether it's for sponsors of the team or for corporate backing, or you just need to have an ownership group in place, which that's the other layer to that, which is you need to have an ownership group that is willing to be there and willing to spend that has the has ties, whether it's to Houston or whatever city. The interesting thing you mentioned is that Houston's a transient town or a transient city. And it's one of the interesting things that I think about for the NHL is that the pros and cons to that. Because one of the issues that people brought up with Phoenix, Arizona, or Arizona in general, why they couldn't attract fans, one of their issues, they had many, so you can't really say this is why they failed there. But one of their issues was that Arizona is a state, or especially Phoenix is a transient state where a lot of people are coming from other areas of the country, or maybe retired, and there isn't that feeling of loyal, well, not necessarily loyalty, but of to that city. And I wonder when you mention that, what the pros and cons to a city that has a lot of people moving in, but also at the same time that there are people that there isn't like this loyal base necessarily that's there already.
I think the one of the best examples is the Houston Texans. Houston Oilers, beloved in this city, love you blue. They leave, and now profession. All the fans here are seeking a professional football team to follow, and because of the rivalry with the Dallas Cowboys, very few Houstonians became Cowboys fans. So they went out and they sought new teams, whether it was the Minnesota Vikings, New Orleans Saints, you name it. But you're right. It's the number one concern that you have to put out there is, okay, someone like myself who relocated here from Philadelphia, who, ultimately bleeds orange and black, why am I going to go support, you know, the Houston to be named NHL franchise? Hopefully it's the Arrows. But with that being said, it takes a generation to be really become a true hockey fans. So I can speak on Philadelphia. 67 Flyers were introduced. 80s, there was a growth of ice rinks, growth of hockey. That's a generation, 18 plus years in the league. Then the craziness when Lindros came about and the expansion of all these ice rinks and the overlap and the continued growth, it goes back to the community investment. And if an organization comes here to Houston and is willing to invest in the community, they're going to see a very, very, very positive following. That's what Houstonians look for. It's very the Southern mentality with Northerners living here. How can we support you that way? Yet, you know, the Chicago Blackhawks may come to town and there's 10,000 Blackhawks fans, but that next night they're going to be wearing Houston colors and supporting the team. You never let go of your, where your roots are, but you always want to support and keep the longevity going. And I think that's one of the things that through Hockey Day in Houston, when I talk to former media personalities that have been here, it's the fact that sports fans in Houston know that if hockey comes back, they're going to support it. It's almost feel like it's a not a privilege, but it's one of those must do's. So hockey survives itself here again. We're currently in the second longest tenure of no professional hockey in town. The longest was after the second coming of the Apollos left to the IHL Arrows, but we're moving close to that. That was 15 years. We're on 13 now. So you talk to the casual sports fans, they want hockey here. The Northerners want hockey here. I really do believe that it would be well supported here.
We're really diving into Houston hockey history while we're at it, and really getting into the thick of it here. What's interesting, the other part to that, you talk about it being sports crazy city, and this is another interesting layer to this. 'Cause I actually have a list because I've been following relocation or markets in general, like a checklist of like some of the key qualities that you need, and Houston has a lot of them. And I think one I would call like an issue potentially. It's not a red flag as much as something you have to consider. And this is for any city that the NHL looks into. Is would you rather go to a city where the fans? The big question: would you rather have angry fans or disinterested fans? And the answer is angry fans, which basically means like you look at a city like Buffalo, for example, where they have two sports teams, the Sabres and the Bills. And the Sabres, do they sell well? Not really, but they have the fans that show up because there's not much else to do. It's the reason I think a lot of people were football in LA was a big has failed a few times, and why people were nervous about the NFL moving back to LA again, because the idea is if the team's not good, if the team's 500, fans won't show up. And my question is, do you think the NHL would prefer in a city, would they prefer to look at a city where there aren't as many options, but there's maybe a smaller population where you're like, okay, we're not going to Houston, which is the fourth or third biggest city in the United States. It's definitely up there. Versus you go to a mid-sized market, whether it be Milwaukee or Portland. I'm just throwing a few cities out there where there aren't as many options, but you can get a loyal base that way. I wonder, do you think that's a concern for Houston or really a concern for any big market that has those other options? I think Atlanta's the same story, which is you have the Atlanta baseball's big in Atlanta. You have college football's big there, and college football's big in a lot of the southern states. So if you're a 500 team that fans are disinterested, do you think that could be a potential issue for some of the bigger cities that already have those teams that are there?
It's always going to be an issue and a concern. I mean, anybody who's investing $2+ billion, they're going to want to make sure that their return on investment is going to be well worth it. So, you look at again the most recent expansion markets. What were they? Nashville, Columbus, Ohio. You have
Well,
Vegas,
Vegas
and
recently,
yeah, exactly. And you look at what they did is they invested into the community and they helped build the hockey interest there because one thing that I think I learned a lot from my days working in the Flyers, and a lot of teams took this model as the Flyers had the first quote unquote corporate ice rink structure, was the fact that it's more than just getting kids playing hockey. It's that element of the community investment, building fans. You take those models, I think it works. But what separates Houston from a lot of the other southern markets goes back to that transient piece. You just touched on Buffalo. I'll never forget one of the first weekends I was here in 2015. I went out to watch pro football, happened to step into the Buffalo Bills watch party group. Every NFL team's associated. They have groups here that are 3,000 plus members. The Bills have 1,000 plus members. I would never guess Buffalo to Houston would work. But that's your foundation here. So the Northerners, the Canadians, the the companies that are from Canada that have offices here, that separates Houston from a lot of the different markets.
So I think what's interesting with that is you're going to get a lot of hockey fans into the arenas. It's going to be interesting. I mean, the first few years, if it was especially with in Houston in particular, it's going to be a lot of home games that feel like road games where the Edmonton Oilers come to town. They'll look like the Houston Oilers because which is also a double reference to the Houston Oilers, but all the Oilers fans who live in Texas are traveling to that game. What's interesting, one of the other interesting parts, this is kind of like shifting gears a bit, but I think another layer to this, something that people don't really think about, is the NHL, when it looks at their 33rd and 34th team, they're also going to look for a 33rd and 34th AHL market and ECHL market, basically, and it's going to be in the area because the new rules, a part of the CBA, which is going to come into effect, is that when a player gets called up and called down, they have to play one game. So there's none of that shenanigans where they send them down, but it's really a paper transaction where they bring them back up. They actually have to play a game now. And one of the new trends in the general in the AHL and development process is teams are going to want to have their affiliate close by for that reason. So one of the layers to this is Houston could apply for this as well, but which AHL markets? Because I feel like, yeah, you could have your team in Houston as well, and you could have a smaller arena for them, or a different. You're maybe you build a suburban arena where they're playing there. But what city nearby? And this could apply to a lot of teams, but are there those cities that are nearby that can hold an AHL and ECHL for that matter type of teammate? Like a San Antonio per se, is that close enough to Houston where you're like, okay, that's a good enough affiliate. But for teams in general, that's one of the things I actually think about. So I'm wondering how, do these teams have these AHL affiliates that, in mind, or cities that they could have that can host a team as well?
Yeah, I mean, you look what Dallas does right now with the AHL team in Austin. You have San Antonio, which is one of the top 10 largest cities, metropolitan areas in all of the country. And then, it's crazy to think about, there's been the rumors about New Orleans and, the Federal Prospects Hockey League right now, low-level minor hockey, but they keep adding teams in Louisiana and they're getting 3 to 4 thousand fans a game because people miss it. There was once a time that when you look back in the early 2000s, Texas had the most amount of professional hockey teams, for any state. And when you look at it, it was at the AA level. And they were 4,000 fans a game. And it just, like you touched on, it comes down to the economics. San Antonio, New Orleans, that's a 2.5 hour ride from Houston. You talk about even north of Houston, which is considered the metropolitan area, the Woodlands and Conroe. Those two cities combined are one of the fastest growing cities in all the country. You got New Orleans, which is 6 hours away. And it really just comes down to, the other locations that are around, where the AHL is, because everything's about trying to reduce travel expenses nowadays. And reducing costs. So if the AHL decides to move south, you'll see, markets like possibly San Antonio reestablish itself in the near future.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting ones is that this is a conversation I actually had with someone who knows a lot about the AHL too. They said that for the AHL specifically, which also could apply to the ECHL, which is becoming the double A version of hockey, is the leagues are going to look for, and this applies to the NHL too, you're going to need to be in a city with an airport hub, which is very important. Houston, obviously, that checks that list. But for these teams, because a lot of AHL teams are playing in cities that don't have that. They're in those original, whether you call it original six or just original markets where they don't have the airport hub. So it becomes another layer to it. So I think what's interesting is is a city like Orlando. If a team goes to Atlanta, Orlando makes a lot of sense, or maybe Jacksonville for as an affiliate city, and also makes Orlando makes a lot of sense in general because it's close to Tampa and Florida and the Florida Panthers. But New Orleans possibly, you're looking at the connectivity there, and I think what's interesting also is, I mean, you're looking for that for the NHL team, which Houston checks that box. But you're also going to look for that with the AHL affiliate because you're especially when teams travel there, it's going to be you're going to need to have that in place, which I think is it's just an important thing to kind of keep in mind with all the with how that works. I'm wondering. We talked a lot about Houston, obviously, and I think we kind of knew coming in it was going to be because you obviously have a lot of background there. I'm wondering what markets you see. Obviously, Houston's one of them, which we've talked a lot about why Houston would work. What other markets do you see potentially working for the NHL if they go 33 and 34? Let's say they do one at a time. Which ones you see, and it could be for similar reasons, but it could also be, let's say, for the opposite, which I mentioned. Let's say a small market, but it's the only attraction or one of the few attractions there.
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at, the ones that you touched on already is Phoenix and Atlanta, and everyone says, you know, about, they failed once or twice and what it takes. It ultimately comes down to, the ownership that's going to be invested into the organization and where the location of the arena is. We heard the concerns in Phoenix and Atlanta with the Thrashers. The new project, from what I understand, is in an area, when I used to coach. It's in an area that's really the hockey metropolitan of Atlanta. So make it easier on your customers. They're going to come to games. It allows them to go to the kids to go to practice and then also go to the game that same night. Arizona, they were very successful when they first came into the league. People forget about that. It was I can't speak on what happened and what the change was, but a new arena outside where the population went, it does make sense. There's a lot of Northerners that live in Arizona now. Um, you know, the world has changed. The ease of technology and being able to call home, you don't think about it. And back, 20 years ago, maybe we are having these conversations that, hockey would struggle in the South. But, Tampa Bay, the Panthers recently, Nashville, the California teams, they've all shown that an investment into the community, look what it's doing. So now look at where the national development players are coming from. California, Florida, you're going to tell me you're not going to get some from Texas? They're already coming from Dallas. Now expand a little bit more. But other markets, I mean, we've all heard, Portland, we've heard San Diego, we've heard Kansas City. It all comes into like Milwaukee, another one. It comes down to what's feasible for the league, what's feasible for the teams there. I mean, as long as I've been alive, everyone wants to put a second team in Toronto. New York has three teams in that, in the general metropolitan area. So, almost anything can work as long as it's got the right market, the right corporate support, and really it comes down to ownership. If the ownership comes out, guns a-blazing, investing in fan development, investing into the community, looking at ways to drive that, the fandom and people playing, I think it's a no-brainer for those markets.
I think through that you kind of went through my checklist, basically of all the things that I've said. Like I've looked at them saying, like from a historic perspective, what works for a new city. And some of them are not red flags or not, but just the checklist. You could tell me if you disagree with any of the things I have here, which is a big population, which I think you could say that's check. Yeah, you need people, obviously. Infrastructure for hockey, like you need the arena, you need not just the arena, but you need accessibility one way or another. Because I think what's interesting, a lot of people say, oh, you need an arena in downtown. And I think the Florida Panthers have actually proved that the model of they play in Sunrise, which is more of a suburban area, and they not only are do they play in that area, but they cater towards a more suburban fan base, and which that means more of you have more family focused type of events versus a city population would be more towards geared toward away from that. And I think what's interesting is that Dallas actually recently has gotten the conversations they want to move out of the city towards Frisco area because a lot of their fans are coming from that area. But that's a different discussion. You need competent ownership. I mean, that's probably the most important one actually. You just need you need competent ownership, and ownership's willing to spend not just on the team, because I know everyone talks about it's a salary cap league, but you have to cut corners anywhere. Owners can cut corners, and some of them do. Hockey history, and that's not a red flag as much as because obviously the league has expanded into Florida and done these expansions as much as it helps. It doesn't hurt. And look at Houston that has the history back in the 70s, the eras, and you look at Atlanta has the history. Whether Atlanta obviously it's not the best history because teams moved out, but you have the history there. I have a big one, and this is also the same red flag. Not it's the limited options for fans, but basically, if a team loses, will the fans lose interest? Which it's more likely if they have more options available for them. And I hit airport. Airport hub's the other one. Do you disagree with any of them? Any of the ones that I mentioned, or is there anyone that you're like, okay, I push back on, or
No, I think you hit it right on. I think one of the other keys is you need to look at the quality of life for the player now. I mean, we all hear about NHL and their training centers and these new models that have been built, and the Texans right now are going through it, looking at building a whole new practice facility. The Rockets just did it. One thing that is often forgotten about Houston, you have the beach. Gulf of Mexico is almost 35, 40 minutes away from, the southern tip of Houston. From the downtown Houston, an hour. Up in Conroe is the lake. So guys who like the fish, they're able to get out there. Bassmasters does an annual event out there. Yeah, we don't have mountains. There's no state income tax, in Texas, which we know how a lot of those
that's a
conversations have been recently with the
that's a big
salary
one.
cap world. But, the quality of life in the areas, the schools, these are all things that it may not be the 20, 21-year-old prodigy that's coming out of, now NCAA or junior, but you got to look at that as a long term because you want athletes to want to stay and reside in the community. You look at a lot of the top franchises, they have a very, very strong alumni support system. And not that we were doing this because it's been about bringing hockey or bringing NHL to Houston. We just, as a community, said we need alumni to be able to re-engage themselves in Houston, whether they live here or not. And what we've learned through these conversations, especially the guys who played in the 70s and the guys who in the IHL days who played in the NHL cities as well, the one thing they said is that Houston is one of their favorite places to play hockey because when it's 20 below in Edmonton in
Mhm.
January, it may be 55, 60 degrees here, and then you can go golfing after practice, or you can go down and clear your mind at the beach. And those are all things that you don't really take into consideration that Houston has as an advantage, and a lot of outdoor, a lot of family type events that really could help, players want to come to Houston.
It's so funny you actually answered the question I was going to ask, which is how a city becomes a destination. Which basically you hit the nail on the head, which is every market can has its advantages, which it can tap into and work. And I think what's interesting is that it's one thing to be a successful hockey market; it's another for to become a destination. It's another to become a place where, with the right infrastructure in place, with a team that has its head on, that is winning, that is successful, you become one of those destination places where players want to go there. And I think, and obviously Houston's one of them. And for years, Florida was talked about like they're a sleeping giant. If they can figure it out, they will be one of the juggernauts in the NHL. And you're seeing it now, where hockey in this people were talking about hockey in the South, can it work? Well, Florida has made it prove that you can use those advantages. People for years were not talking about taxes, and now everyone's talking about state taxes. Except, and Texas, obviously, they can lean into that if they if if they become a destination, and you have all the stuff there, which can make it a great spot. I guess that's all we got for now. Lance, thanks for joining. And while you're at it, we only have a little bit left on this meeting. You can just kind of plug anything for the listeners to pay attention to, or stuff. I don't want to say stuff you're working on, because I don't know. I don't want to dive into anything saying like, "Oh, what are you working on?" And then people be like, "Oh, this is what he does," or something. But anything to pay attention to, or follow, watch, for the fans to while you're at it.
No, I think there's quite a few stories here, especially in the recent future, without having the NHL support. So the first one, it goes back to our event, the Hockey Day in Houston, www.hockeydayinhouston.com. And what we were able to do is we partnered with Mark and Marty Howell with the Howell Foundation. They offered a $25,000 matching donation last year, a second one this year. It just shows the commitment and the impact that Houston made to probably hockey's most famous family. To be able to say, hey, we're going to make this, without an NHL team, we're going to invest in what you guys are doing because we have seen what has happened in the community. And what is that? In the community, you got the Houston Storm. They're a girls hockey program, started with 50 girls 4 years ago and have grown to over 200. They joined a National Travel League and are developing players now that are getting into the tier one level of hockey. That's your idea of creating that fandom. It's already here. An owner can see this and say, hey, these organizations are doing that. The kids who play on the Houston Junior Arrows, we just recently had a kid drafted directly from a tier two organization to the WHL. Not often do you see that, but you get a lot of the transplants that are high level hockey players that are there. Organizations are partnering with Tim Hortons now. We have a Tim Bits hockey program in Houston because it's just trying to grow. And with or without hockey, this community here is really dedicated to build women's, girls. I coach sled hockey here. You name it. We're looking for ways to keep hockey to the forefront. One day we believe that whether it's the NHL or professional hockey, it'll be here. And that day that happens, we're looking forward to it. I think one of the key talking points goes back to a gentleman who I don't know. And when we spoke about why Hockey Day in Houston, what is the purpose? You look at NHL markets or AHL markets, 38, 35, 43, 44 times a year, people can come together and celebrate the game of hockey. We do it once a year. And a guy went on the news and he was so passionate about bringing the NHL and bringing professional hockey back. I don't know who he is. I want to try to find him because he is exactly what this city is craving. And one day we're going to have it again. And until then, there is a very passionate community base that we're looking for big support because every other city has it. We just are searching for it now to help us out. But of course, one day we all want professional hockey back in Houston.
Yeah, I mean that's why it's one of the cities the NHL is looking at. All right, we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back.